Are you ready to elevate your embossing folder game? Let's marry two easy techniques and create one stunning result. Let's get crafting. Today, I'm going to be introducing a background stamp and some white heat embossing to my embossing folder. So I am using this woodware background stamp called Old Paper. Now the beauty to this is you can't read what's written, and it's got some postmarks and some splotches, so it's just meant to give you some texture. Now I have applied it to my glass mat, and I'm just using a glue eraser to get rid of whatever junk might be on that stamp. Now I'm just going to go ahead and ink it up with some Versamark clear sticky ink. I am using Accent Opaque 100-pound cardstock for this technique. I did try this in the past with some heavyweight watercolor paper and found that I just didn't like the amount of texture on the background. It was taking away from what I was putting on. So I prefer this smooth Accent Opaque cardstock. I've just given it a good rub to transfer that Versamark onto my cardstock, and then I'm going to go ahead and dump some white embossing powder on it. I did not use an embossing bag on this, probably should have, but I figured it's white on white, so if there's any white flecks on it, you're not going to see it anyway. And this particular background stamp has what would appear, if you did it in black, ink splotches. Tap off any extra embossing powder onto my piece of copy paper. I fold my copy paper so it creates a nice funnel, and I am less likely to dump embossing powder all over my desk because I am truly a klutz, and it has definitely happened. So now I'm just making sure that my Wow Heat embossing tool is heated up. I generally like to heat it up about 10 or so seconds before I try to melt my cardstock. It just melt the embossing powder. By preheating your embossing tool, it allows for quicker melting of that embossing powder and less warpage of your cardstock. Now, the thinner or lighter weight cardstock you use, the more warpage you're going to have. It's really not that big a deal because paper doesn't have a memory, so you can kind of fold it back and kind of straighten it back out. But I really do love the way that embossing powder melts. In my mind, white embossing powder, when I first put it on, has a gray cast to it. And as I melt it, it turns glossy white. So that's how I'm looking to make sure that everything is melted on the card. With the embossing done, I'm moving on to my embossing folder. This is a Spellbinders 3D embossing folder called Notched Corner Florals. And I have some Distress Oxides. Now you can certainly use whatever water reactive ink you want with this. I prefer oxides because I enjoy the opacity of oxides rather than the translucency of a dye-based ink. The first technique we're using is called inked embossing, and all I'm doing is using detailed brushes that I got from Amazon. I'll link everything in the description box below for you. And I'm just inking up the detail brushes with first Kitsch Flamingo and then second Picked Raspberry. I'm pretty heavily adding my color, and I am not being very careful about it. I'm just kind of slapping the color on. This doesn't take rocket science. It's just get the color on the folder. I like the darker colors because I want to transfer that darker color to my cardstock. I'm just using a this one's not damp. This is just a dry washcloth next to me, and I'm just wiping off my detail brush so that I don't contaminate my ink pads. My green that I'm using today is Twisted Citron, and I'm going to be coloring up the leaves with that and then going in with a darker accent of Rustic Wilderness. Again, I'm really not being very careful about where I'm putting the ink. I'm just getting ink on where I know it's going to fall onto my cardstock. This is a really large embossing folder. It measures 5 3/4 inches by 8 3/4 inches. So far larger than my A2 size card panel. So I just kind of picked where I wanted the card to fall, and that's where I'm coloring within. At this point, I have switched out to tumbled glass and a small blending brush, not as large as my usual blending brushes, for background detail. Now, you want color on this flat part of your embossing folder because you want the white heat embossing that we've already done to resist that color so you see it. If you just left it white, you would have just white on white and there really wouldn't be anything to see. Using a water sprayer, I am spritzing the ink on my embossing panel, and I have chosen to go ahead and spritz the back of my white heat embossed card as well. That loosens up the fibers of the card and allows it to go through the embossing folder without cracking. Now with the Accent Opaque 100-pound cardstock, I don't really find that it cracks very much, so it might be an unnecessary step, but I still go ahead just in case. I already spent too much time on it to allow it to tear. I have run this through my SPELLBINDERS Platinum 6 die cutting machine, and I've just put a piece of paper towel on the top to absorb any additional water left over that I've added to either the back of the cardstock or to the front of the embossing folder. And it's still damp, so I'm going to go ahead and speed up the process by using my heat tool to go ahead and dry that cardstock. My background finishing up drying, I'm going to go ahead and work on my embellishments. Here I'm using a SPELLBINDERS die set. This one is called Simply Perfect Layered Blooms. I'm not sure if this is still available, but if it is, I'll link it in the description box below. But I was just looking for a small, dainty flower that I could add for some three-dimensional embellishments, and this is just white cardstock that is scrap. It's just from my scrap bin. I've added the exact same colors and gone ahead and die cut out the inside of the bloom. And I'm going to go ahead and brush out all the little pieces that come out of there before I move on to the background of the flower. Now this was done in Kitsch Flamingo with a little bit of picked raspberry for the center. This little flower piece has an inside and an outside portion, and this is for the outside. So I'm using picked raspberry. I want the darker portion to be on the back side of my little bloom, and once again just some scrap cardstock that I have lying around. I've just put down some picked raspberry. Again, I'm really not ink blending. I don't really care how it comes out because it's going to come out beautiful no matter what. I am using Bearly Arts Precision Craft Glue as my liquid glue of choice. And here's where I realize it doesn't really matter if it lines up or not. Flowers aren't perfect in nature and we still love them. So that's where we're going with it. Just getting them stuck together using a little acrylic block to allow that glue time to dry and not to bunch up on me. The takeaway here is to just be free with your craft and have fun with it. Don't overthink it. Now I found these cute little stoppers. They're silicone stoppers for my glue bottle, and I don't have to use the pin anymore, which I love. Now I'm using the Accent Opaque 100-pound cardstock for my base as well. I've already cut it down to A2 size. It is a top folding card, and I've cut out a piece of matte metallic cardstock with my SPELLBINDERS postage edge rectangle die. I really like this die. I find that I use it a lot more than not. So, you know, get use out of your supplies anywhere you can. Now, I did have to cut this down a little so that it fit directly in the center. But look at how pretty that is, and it really plays off of that metallic. I'm going to go ahead and hold it down with an acrylic block, which I switch out, and I'm going to move on to my flowers. Now I have also die cut out one of the leaves from that metallic cardstock as well because I want to bring that to the forefront. I'm using a stamping mat and I'm going to use a ball stylus to go ahead and shape my flowers a little bit. Now all I'm doing is running that ball over my cardstock to kind of break up the fibers in a circular motion. So it causes the cardstock to kind of collapse within itself and have some additional dimension. Now I'm going to leave the gold metallic card leaf alone. I just wanted the flowers to have a little shape. Here I've taken out my sentiment binder. Now this is just a binder that I keep any pre-made sentiments that I have, whether they be stamped images or from digital downloads. I have a digital download that is extremely well priced with over 100 sentiments that you can print out on copy paper or cardstock, and I will link that below in the description box as well. In this case, I'm looking for something that has some gold embossing on it. This is perfect. It just says, "Just because." With my layers now dry, I have taken my 3 little flowers, and this is my process. I don't usually show this, but I'm just working out in my head where I want the flowers. Now, from a design standpoint, typically things that are in odd numbers and placed in a triangular pattern are more pleasing to the eye. So that's really what I'm working out here is, do I want to leave that little leaf as a full leaf? Do I want to cut it apart? Where do I want the sentiment? And so on. Well, with my decisions made, I've gone ahead and finished this card. Now here you've got a white heat embossed background with an inked embossing folder technique on top. And I also did colored cardstock with the same technique, and I inked it with black soot distress oxide and finished with a critter and sentiment. Now before you go, check out some other videos that I've selected just for you. Until next time, I'll see you real soon.